First of all, we should introduce Katina, right?
Absolutely.
So go ahead.
Okay, this is Katina Hyman. This is her third day. So she's actually here to absorb more than participate. But she is our new user interface, user experience specialist here as part of the IT team at Cooperative Extension Administration. So you'll be hearing more from her in upcoming months. You know, she's in total overwhelm mode right now. So, but she'll be participating in this team with, you know, working very closely with all of the communications folks at some point. So, so you'll see her on this call pretty often.
Cool, cool. So to get started today, we're just going to talk about accessible digital communication, why it matters, and how we here at CCE can move forward to implementation. This is a big topic, so we're going to hopefully lay out the rationale for doing it, and then our initial approach to trying to wrestle with this ungainly beast that we have in front of us. I'd like to ask everybody, have you all, I'm going to hold up these things. Have you all, can everybody see that? Have you all received your cards from your EDs?
Yeah.
There's a booklet and a series of two cards. They were passed out at the ELC 2 weeks ago, and the intent was to get them into communicators and IT specialists' hands.
And in fact, everybody got the cards. The ones that are just the single cards, that should have gone to all staff as well.
Okay, so Lisa got the cards, and Courtney, excellent. So it seems like they're filtering out there. That's very cool. So that's our first sort of opening salvo in this whole implementation process. And we'll talk about those in a little bit. How do I make it go?
You might have to click on the, I'll do it.
There we go. So we do have, a few months ago, we established an accessibility team, and that includes Katie and Jen Halloran, who many of you, well, all of you know, Katina, who's our newest member, Heather, and myself. And we will be sort of spearheading the effort to bring digital communications into some sort of compliance with accessibility standards over the next extended period of time.
Yeah, and we'll get into the details of that. You know, it takes a while, but we're gonna do it in chunks.
Yeah.
And we're hoping that you all can use us as resources as you are approaching this in your own associations.
So the question is, why accessibility now? Why are we focusing on this? First of all, it's the law. You know about the ADA, and there are sections 504 and 508. We'll talk about those in a minute. There's a push campus-wide at Cornell to improve web accessibility. It's finally risen to the surface. So they're starting to develop some trainings and resources that will be useful as we move forward. Making accessible documents, accessible websites, accessible online courses and videos improves accessibility for everybody. So it's a good thing to do, it's the right thing to do, and it just makes us more accessible, which not just because it's a good thing to do and a nice thing to do, it is legally required. So we'll talk about the laws quickly. We're not legal experts by any means, but we know what these laws mean and the impact they can have. The first one is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this has been around for quite a while, 25, 20, almost 30 years. It prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. So that means that if we are putting resources out in the world, we should be putting them out there in a way that somebody who is differently able can access them. And there are a bunch of methods to do that. And as we start backfilling the content that we have, we're going to have to engage some of those methods just to make sure we're in compliance. Section 504 and 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. These sections are just clarifications. 508 really defines what it means for information and communication technology to be accessible. So you'll hear a lot of reference to 508. We'll rely on some 508 resources. Those really narrow it down and focus on the issue of accessibility and technology. And that's sort of where we are right now. And there are standards that have been developed, and World Wide Web Consortium, which is this large consortium of folks who get together to talk about the web and how we should have standards and what those standards are. They have an initiative called the Web Accessibility Initiative. They've developed strategies and resources. We're going to be relying on those as well. But we'll also look to the standards to offer us guidance as we move forward. And the standards currently, WCAG 2.1 just was approved, which is a .1 refinement of WCAG 2. And those were created to give some idea of what success looks like when you're moving towards accessibility. So those standards are sort of benchmarks. We want to be compliant with those standards as close as possible. There are different levels of compliance, and we'll move through those as we move forward in time.
And I wanted to just point out, a lot of this refers to web accessibility, web content, but really we're extending it to sort of all electronic resources. If you provide an electronic resource, for example, an email newsletter or a PDF that you email around or whatever it is, we're extending it to that. And actually, not just us, all of Cornell is extending it to those kind of resources too. So it's not just web stuff, it's beyond web.
It really is. I mean, and the title of this presentation is Digital Communication Accessibility, and that really is what it is. And it extends to video and social media as well. Mm-hmm. So really, we don't want to focus it and narrow it down to say, as long as our websites are accessible, we're good. It really is this broad umbrella that covers all the digital communications we're creating and sending out into the world. So that just really makes it even more daunting. But hey, we're up to the challenge, aren't we? So the WCAG has 4 principles of accessibility. We're going to just take a quick look at this. And I realize that there's some detail here, and we're going into some little bits of depth here that will play out later in your lives as you start working on these things. So there's a good reason to build this foundation. The other thing I should mention is this PowerPoint will be available after the webinar at accessibility.cce.cornell.edu, so you can go there. The PowerPoint has a bunch of live links built in, so you can actually jump to some of the content as you are learning. So the 4 principles are: content should be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And I want to take a quick look at each one of those to sort of tease out what they mean. So when we talk about perceivable content, the definition is information and user interface components must be presentable in ways that users can perceive. So it can't be invisible to all of the user's senses. So you have to provide text alternatives for non-text content. So that if you're talking about video, captioning, things like that are important. And the second point is captions for multimedia. Create content that can be presented in different ways, including assistive technologies, without losing meaning. When we talk about assistive technologies, I don't know, has anyone had experience with things like screen readers or braille printers or other technologies? And if you have, just pop a note in the chat, because I'd be curious if anybody has had experience with those. And you have to make it easier for users to see and hear content, which includes adding additional details in the background that some of these technologies can take advantage of. Are we doing okay pace-wise? Everybody good? Lisa, you have a question?
I think she was answering our last.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, if you guys have questions as we go, feel free to chat them at us, and we can try to address questions as we go too.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Sorry. I confuse myself sometimes. What does operable mean? It means the user interface components and navigation must be operable. Well, let's include the term in the definition. Users must be able to operate the interface. So what does that really mean? If you have a screen reader, you need to be able to navigate with it from a keyboard.
Right.
You have to have enough time. Yes, there is, in the cards that were handed out, the one card that was handed out to everybody, the one that has a little mouse with a red slash through it, everybody in the system got this, and our hope is to encourage everybody in the system to engage in this 15-minute exercise of trying to navigate without using your mouse. It really becomes an enlightening experience when you try to navigate some of our resources in a way that a differently able person would try to navigate. You can then begin to understand a little more deeply why this is important and why it is incumbent upon us to provide access to all of our users. Do not use content that causes seizures or physical reactions. Some of you are old enough to remember the days of
GeoCities.
Yeah, GeoCities and animated GIFs that would just go crazy.
Right.
So you have to be careful when you start doing things like that. You have to help people navigate and find content and make it easier to use inputs other than keyboard, so voice inputs, things like that. So operable is a big chunk of what you have to work on.
And you said, Paul, that all of these are links, right? So they're
right. So any of these blue highlighted things in the PowerPoint that'll be posted, you can link, and it will take you to even more in-depth information on what it means to make text readable and understandable. So it has to be comprehensible. It has to be understandable. It has to operate in predictable ways. So your interfaces have to be consistent across the whole site or system. And you have to help users avoid and correct mistakes. So that's a complicated one that is way down the road for us.
But one thing about understandable that I want to point out is that there is a piece of this that is usability. I mean, truly, for
right.
Even not for the accessibility reason, right? I mean, you kind of do want your websites to be consistent, right? You kind of do want people to be able to know where to find the search box every time, or know where the navigation bars are, and have it be consistent. So this, if you're kind of following, if you're thinking about usability as you're designing things, some of this actually flows, not all of it, but some of it actually flows from
right.
that.
And there are ways that you can really use this as a lever to build incredibly accessible and open sites that gets the full range of usability out of your content. So it's all just part of good practice, I think. Content has to be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a variety of user agents. So that means if you have a screen reader, is your content actually comprehensible to somebody using a screen reader? So you also have to look at future-proofing these things. And this is something I think is another principle that goes into usability in general. If we future-proof the way we do things now, we won't have to go back and redesign our websites in general. We'll have to refresh them, we'll have to integrate new tools, but we can design in a way that makes it comprehensible into the future, and not rely on obscure and weird proprietary standards.
True. You can't always see what the future holds, but
I know. Talk to me later. I'll tell you. There's a fee involved.
Just email Paul.
Oh my God, I'm just clicking around here and confusing myself. If any of these are not true, users with disabilities will not be able to use the web. So you have those four sort of guiding principles that if you falter on one of those, you're excluding a part of the community that you're trying to reach, the community that we have a legal obligation to provide access to. So we need to take that seriously. So what are we doing as far as implementing accessibility here at CCE? Well, the first step, the first sort of announcement that we're engaging in this effort is the distribution of these Accessibility Matters cards and the keyboard shortcuts, which are really cool. It covers 7 different applications, your major Microsoft applications, Acrobat, InDesign, social media, and one other. Everybody in the system got the first 2 cards, the Accessibility Matters and the keyboard shortcut card. Everybody in the system who is IT or comm, has responsibilities in there, should have copies of the quick card set.
Right. And also, we provided the electronic copies of these as well on the accessibility site, which we'll show you at the end. If you wanted to print them out for others, we just didn't have enough budget to make the little booklets for everybody in the system. So we thought reaching you guys, reaching the communicators and the IT folks would at least get us part of the way there.
So that's just introducing the concept into the whole system. The whole Accessibility Matters, it's just a plea to say, please pay attention to this. This is important. It's an issue we're all encountering. So hopefully people didn't just recycle those. We did adapt the Accessibility Matters cards from Minnesota IT Services. They had these on their website. We found them and they were just too good to pass up, so we asked permission to repurpose them. They granted it without hesitation. We do encourage you to take the keyboard shortcuts challenge if you hadn't already. It is an enlightening experience. So there are the 7 quick cards for applications in Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Outlook, Acrobat, InDesign, and social media. So please make use of those as we go forward. You can start today. If you're firing up a Word document, you can certainly pull this out and take a look at how you can make that document more accessible. So our plan as we move forward is to start small, but start now. So any new content that we're developing should be developed with accessibility in mind. And you can start educating yourself by learning the 6 core skills, which we'll talk about in just a minute. We need to be able to provide accommodation as needed. And what accommodation means is if somebody sends an email to your office and says, I use a screen reader and I can't access your content, you need to be able to provide a way for them to do that. That's a sort of could be a labor-intensive way to do it, but until we come into full compliance, it's the only way we have.
And it's actually what Cornell is doing too, so we're kind of just hopping on what they're doing for their own websites. I mean, if you actually use a screen reader and try to go through the cornell.edu websites, a lot of those are not up to snuff either. So we're not the only ones who are behind here. And so we're doing what they're doing, which is to actually we haven't done it yet, but we will, is to provide a link at the bottom of our sites. If you need accommodation, let us know. The reason we haven't added it yet is because we don't have the process in place to do that here yet. But once we have the process in place, we're going to do that here.
Yeah, so accommodation is an important sort of stopgap measure that gets us from where we are to where we want to be. We should make it known that we're doing this as long as we can staff it. Mm-hmm. But it is, again, our legal obligation. It's our moral and ethical obligation.
And we recommend that you guys, as you're thinking about this, I mean, obviously we're not managing your websites and we're not managing your digital content. We're hoping you get ideas from this presentation today about ways that you can adjust what you've got out there and ideas about how to move forward yourselves.
So I'm going to say something now, and Heather's probably going to yell at me.
Uh-oh.
So
everyone close your ears.
Develop a robust plan for ensuring accessibility for all current and prior digital content. We do have the small team that we're working on here. I would extend the invitation to anybody on this call or anybody else in the comm or IT group who's interested, who would like to participate in the development and implementation of this plan to join us. Mm-hmm. The development of the plan is going to take a few months because we need to really take it seriously, figure out how we're staffing and sourcing it, and then move forward. So if anybody after this presentation is really interested, you can email us at the accessibility address, and we'll gladly bring you into this process and rely on you to help us as we move forward.
Now, why would I yell about that?
I don't know, because every once in a while I say something you may.
That's true, but it wasn't this time.
Okay, we'll see.
You guys are welcome to be a part of this.
I'm obviously getting better at reining in my more rambunctious instincts. So there's 6 core skills. We mentioned Minnesota, the state IT department. The University of Minnesota also has this incredible website they've developed called Accessible U. This is where we're drawing the 6 core skills from. And you can click any of these links to go to more details about them. But the 6 core skills they expect designers and developers to have are understanding headings and document structure, what to do about hyperlinks, video captions, bullets and numbers list, colors and contrast, and image alt texts. And we're just going to look at those in depth. Here's Katie dropped the email in. So I'm not going to read these each slide by slide. It's going to be made available to you at the accessibility site. But each one of these 6 core skills is linked out to something that will give you some training, and you should really check out their website because it's really well done. And when you go to a training link, they tell you it's going to take you approximately 4 minutes to complete this training, which is largely just reading at this point. But it's very cool, and they've done a really nice job laying this out for us. And so there's no point in us reproducing the wheel when we can take use of this. And I don't want to, Katie, how much time do we have to talk about this?
We have until noon.
Oh.
So plenty of time.
I thought there was only half an hour. Okay.
We can do a half an hour of questions.
Okay, cool. All right. So in the interest of not boring you to tears and trying to develop some excitement, I just want to quickly jump through the 6 and let you see roughly what they're talking about. learning to write good hyperlinks, text, and really a lot of this is about describing the content that you're putting up there and being able to describe it in a way that makes sense and is not just mumbo jumbo. And I know too often in the past when I've been throwing up an image and it asks me for alt text, I will just put something in to satisfy the needs of it and not really think about if I were trying to understand this from a different perspective. So it really is about clarifying, and again, the whole exercise is beneficial regardless of whether you're talking about accessibility or not, because the UI principles and then the principles of speaking in language that is clear and comprehensible is something we all need to learn to do better, I think. Because especially being connected to an academic institution, we tend to use jargon. And jargon is not really helpful for most human beings.
This whole, the last slide talking about hyperlinks, it is something, actually, it's one of those things that has always bugged me. I mean, I really like to have hyperlinks that are that are understandable. You know, I'm always pushing the idea of having like vanity URLs for things and things like that. And there are a number of systems that we have, like team sites, for example, that will, I mean, they really get in the way of this. I mean, it is really, it's very hard because you generate a link there and it's like this long thing with a bunch of numbers and, you know, who knows what it is, right? So, I mean, I actually think part of the hyperlinks thing is adding an alt text to the
right,
itself,
so that when you
telling
mouse
what
over,
it is there.
the screen reader
Yes,
can actually understand.
exactly.
And the same practice, if you use Bitly or any other URL shorteners, there's the same practice of providing comprehensible alt text.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, hyperlinks, it's just one of those things that some systems are not good at that. Video captioning is important, especially when we start moving forward to generating more video. There's a push on to do some training around creating video for social media, and that really needs to fold this process in as well, the captioning process.
Now, is it true that there is some auto captioning that can happen?
So YouTube can auto caption, now, which is cool. So you upload your video and then you can let YouTube auto caption it. The thing is, that's not sufficient, because depending on the different voices that are being heard in that video or the level of the video, it may have anywhere between, I don't know, if it's really bad at the low end, maybe 50 to 60% to 85% accuracy. So once you caption that video, you have to go through and manually correct it. That is generally the process with any automated captioning process, regardless of whether it's YouTube or some provided tool or something you pay money for. You know, that on the high-end tools, you get closer to 90% accuracy, but you still have to go through and edit that text to make sure that it's not saying something that's gibberish. That's the same experience if you've ever used Google Translate to translate from any language to English. Same experience. You can't rely on the translated version because there are going to be grammatical errors. There are going to be things it just doesn't understand how to handle. So there is still work involved, even though you can do some of it automatically. And doing some of it automatically is great, because doing all of it manually is really tedious.
Yes.
And I don't think we have the budget to spend $40, $50 an hour on hiring people to transcribe for us. Although that would be an interesting innovation grant.
We would burn through it pretty quickly.
We would,
yes.
but it would be interesting. So bullets and numbered lists, just sort of what you should do when you're presenting those and how you can make those accessible. Color and contrast, there are some really handy color contrast checkers that are available online, and we may have linked those in our accessibility course, but if we haven't, we'll certainly include that.
I wanted to talk about just 1 second, actually the one before this, you don't have to go back though, just the bulleting. That's something, if you are already doing websites, that's something you kind of already do, right? I mean, you know to chunk things into little bullets and little, you know, throw it up in little chunks instead of big long paragraphs, which, you know, we tend to do. We tend to, you know, we're used to sort of writing, you know, writing papers, writing, you know, writing articles, and then, you know, and then when you translate it into web, actually some of that flows naturally. So if you're already doing that, you're already a lot of the way there, I think.
Right. I mean, and again, it just goes back to the idea that these principles are not just applicable to accessibility. They're applicable to just good standards for developing digital communications. So color and contrast, image alt text. We mentioned alt text before. Is anybody out there currently doing really good alt text for their images? I mean,
It's really good, but I've been doing it.
Good. You're doing something, which is good.
so Katie's working on it. Anybody else out there in the world doing alt text for things?
Like Paul had mentioned before, it's it's easy to throw something in there, like you put up the picture of a educator up and you call it person, but part of the whole thing is not just adding alt text, but actually adding alt text that makes sense, right? So actually naming the person.
And there are some really good examples, I think, at that. If you click that link, there's some really good examples on how to do it properly. Moodle does a cool thing where if you're uploading an image, it will ask you what the alt text is, and really, if you don't put any in there, it will say, are you sure you don't want to include it? Now, I think I might be able to go the next step and enforce the inclusion of it. That still doesn't mean people aren't going to do the thing like, red wagon.
Right. Or just run their hand over the keyboard. QWERTY. Everything is just QWERTY.
So
we might be able to require it for our sites too. I mean, that's something we should think about and look into.
Yeah, I mean, and again, one of the challenges that we face, I think, overall, is this is a little more deliberate process, and it takes more time. And I don't think we're the greatest at being deliberate and time wealthy. So we try to squeeze these things in, and when it asks for an alt tag, you just sort of throw in whatever is at the top of your head and move on to the next thing. But I think we have to slow down a little, and we have to be much more intentional and deliberate about what we're doing. And Katie, I'm sure, can attest that when you're writing communications, you want to take your time. You don't want to send that email off immediately after you get the thing that makes you angry, because and so it's sort of the process is we take our time.
Also, one thing I wanted to point out that's kind of related to that just came to my head is that often people think about this, especially the digital accessibility, the web accessibility, as being an IT function, like your IT person will take care of this. And it's really not, which is why we're talking to you guys. I mean, it's really related to the content. As you could see, those 6 pillars that we just talked about, they were all content-based. It's like, as you're creating your video, make sure you're captioning it. As you're adding an image, make sure you're sticking in alt text in there. As you're formatting, make sure you're using bullets and headings and everything. So it's really not, I mean, IT can maybe help by requiring things. I mean, I'm not sure, maybe one of you can speak to the Think Topography web platform out there. I'm actually not, we don't use it, so I'm not even sure how much it prompts for this kind of stuff. But, so IT can be your partner in this, but it really is the communicators. It really is the communication function.
Yeah, I mean, if we had a tool that would suddenly do this for us, we'd certainly use it.
Right, I use it to do my job.
But unfortunately, that tool does not exist, and until we develop the practice, and it is just a practice, it's just learning a new skill and integrating that skill into your daily work. The sources that were used for this presentation are all linked here. You can see Minnesota is my hero right now. There is Section 508 training. It's a GSA site, so it's not the most wonderful, but it's still there and it's useful, and GSA is responsible for massive government systems. So they really thought hard on how you implement accessibility. So the Technology Accessibility Playbook is what we'll be using to build our accessibility plan going forward. You can certainly take a look at that. That is linked in this, and it's also on the accessibility site. So if you have questions, there is accessibility.cce. There's the Cornell resources, which is accessibility.cornell. And then there's the CCE-accessibility at cornell.edu, which is your method for sending questions about this sort of thing.
And it basically reaches us here.
Yeah.
We're sitting in this room.
So I want to get rid of this and open up this and maximize. Are y'all good with seeing the Tech Accessibility at CCE page? Everybody see that?
Looks good over here.
Okay.
Cool.
Good.
So this is the main sort of portal we're using for providing accessibility training and resources to you guys and to staff in general. It does have sections. There's the PowerPoint here, which will be available at 1 p.m. to everybody in the world. Social Security Administration has some best practices, which are handy. Technology Accessibility Playbook. I was messing around with a new tool for Moodle and created a short quiz, which is just kind of fun. It is fun. It's fun. Trust me, it's fun. So WebAIM, there are a bunch of things here. The quick cards you can see are there available as application quick cards. If you're developing online courses, there's a whole thing on Universal Design for Learning, which UDL is just the online learning part of accessibility. But the UDL guidelines, again, are some of those guidelines that apply to general usability. Social media, the quick card is there for social media. And accessibility tools, there's an introduction to screen readers. So has anybody of our massive audience of 13 people, has anybody used a screen reader before or toyed with one? Hands up or chat if you have.
I think you might have asked that already. I think we got maybe.
Did I ask you?
Hands up.
Okay,
I think we did.
we got, is that where Laura, somebody raised their hand? Lisa. Okay, sorry, I'm repeating myself. One of those things that happens with age. Did I ever tell you about the time? No. There is, NVDA is a screen reader that you can actually download and install. It's free. And I strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you to download it, install it, and try to use that as a way of working as well. You will immediately see the difficulties with somebody who's using a screen reader, what they have to go through in order to get access to the content in a way that makes sense. It's a really good exercise. It's well worth taking the time to do that, and it would also be worth inflicting all of our EDs on. It does drive home immediately the point of we are not accessible. We have a ways to go, and so I encourage that behavior. Everybody has access to the course. If you go to accessibility.cc.cornell.edu, you can log in with your NetID and password. It is currently on the staff learning site. That's where it's going to live for the foreseeable future.
I have an anecdote about the screen reader. So I attended an accessibility training here. It was a couple of years ago. It was before this big push recently. I think they tried a couple of years ago to push it here, and then I don't know, fizzled, and then whatever. But they had a nice a presentation where they brought people in who were differently abled, who would show us. I mean, they actually had them in front of the audience trying to use a screen reader, and there was some screen reader and plus some other things. And the guy who was using the screen reader, he was very interesting. So he pointed it at something that worked, and a website that was fine or good enough, and then he pointed it at the main student system here, the course system. So if you're a student signing up for courses, the screen reader could not read anything in that course system. So again, this is a couple years ago. I don't know if they're up to snuff now, but it is actually a good, good reminder that even some big companies that we are, that we might be contracting with are not, not quite there. So if you are contracting with any companies for any kind of systems, I mean, this is a good. Download a screen reader and see what it does.
Right.
See if you can read it without looking.
And there's a short video. The WebAIM video here is a nice little video just to sort of show people, to impress on why it matters. Because it does. I think there are 3 or 4 disabled folks who are using different methods to try to access content, and it illustrates the process. But again, there's something very tangible and visceral about having the experience yourself. And that's why the 15 minutes without a mouse thing is also a good exercise for everybody.
Totally.
So we have a question regarding font readability.
Sans serif versus serif?
Yeah, why is one more readable than the other?
Yeah.
My intuition, and this is just intuition, is that serif fonts can be pretty variant. And I think sans serif fonts are much more consistent, so I think systems might have an easier time understanding it.
Yeah, I'm not sure though. I'm not sure if it's referring to the actual using it on say a screen reader, or if it's just using it, say if somebody was vision impaired, right? But not all the way impaired, who actually just had to blow it up on the screen. I mean, it might be that the serif fonts tend to not sort of magnify well enough or something, but this is a good question.
It's a very good question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've read too that serif fonts are easier for printed material. So I don't know if there's been some research or something on it being different on the screen.
Right, because they usually do tell you, right, if you're making a website to try to use the sans serif font, even though they're so boring. You don't want to use a sans serif font.
There you go. Experts do not always agree which fonts are most readable or which ones are most appropriate for web use.
Okay.
So there is no answer.
Yeah, although it does say best to use standard fonts, so I think that's a good point. And standard fonts could be either serif or sans serif, you know. And this isn't even accessibility. This is just plain old web, you know,
Right.
like web usability. You don't want to like use some funky font that is really hard to read. I mean,
Like
that's just
cursive fonts or
like those, those, right, exactly. I mean, you know,
fantasy fonts.
yeah, right, yeah.
So again, unfortunately, Courtney, there's no cut and dried answer.
Although if you do some research, Courtney, and if you come up back with anything, bring it to the group because it would be good to hear.
Yeah. So again, this site is one of those that's linked on the course, and it's a very good site for resources. Really digs into a lot of it in depth. So that's pretty much what we have available for you at this moment.
Oh, also in the upper right, we link out to the Cornell IT accessibility, which I realize there's not much on there.
Right.
But I do want to point out that Cornell has been ramping up, as we mentioned earlier. They're ramping up resources. They've been like publishing tips on, you know, like they're sort of very funny. I don't know why they're coming up with the random tips that they're coming up with, but they are coming up with some tips and some training. Whenever I hear about any of that, if it's training, I always go back to them and say, hey, could you Zoom this too? And if they offer a Zoom, I always forward it to you guys. And if there are any tips, I'm going to continue to forward it to you guys. I've heard from a few of you that it is helpful. I'm sorry if it feels like spam, but I think it's important to kind of get it in front of you. And we can start to, now that we have this course, we can actually start to add those things here as well.
Right, and we can fire up, you know, we can put a discussion board in here if anybody would find that useful and pose questions. So that's what we have.
I have a couple questions.
Oh, Katie has a couple questions.
So when we're talking about hyperlinking, is there an appropriate time to include the entire URL instead of using a hyperlink?
I think if the URL is comprehensible, like if it is, you know, cce.cornell.edu/homegardens, for example.
Which doesn't exist. But
I know. For example, in my perfect world, cce.cornell.edu/homegardens. That, as opposed to cce.cornell.edu/5769 ? U = blah. I wouldn't include anything that's not readable and comprehensible.
Okay.
So if the URL, if the hyperlink is actually a comprehensible thing, I would drop it in there whole. Also, there's the question of, does it interrupt the flow? So if it's in a paragraph, does it interrupt the flow? So if it's a screen reader, how's it going to handle that? And also visually, how's it going to handle it for somebody? So that there's no definitive answer, but it's just, if it makes sense, do it. If it doesn't make sense, or if you think about it, it seems to not make sense, don't do it.
Something that's related to that is, and this is another thing that is really not just web accessibility, it's just usability in general, but you know, when people do like the click here thing, they hide a link behind the words click here. That's something that totally screws up screen readers. I mean, like if you, like, they want you, if you're going to actually describe a link, hide a link behind a description, they want that description to actually be, to actually talk about what that link is, not just, you know, go here or click me. I mean, like that just never, and it really doesn't work in general. I mean, just sort of from a usability standpoint, and it's something we all do because it's super easy, right? It's super easy to try to shorten your paragraph and make it not sound like you're repeating yourself, but you actually do some of the stuff. You actually have to repeat yourself quite a bit.
Yeah. I find it one of the things that is enduringly, perpetually frustrating to me is when you click a link and it suddenly opens up a PDF or a Word document. You have no idea.
Or a video.
Yeah.
And it starts like screaming at you. Yes.
So yeah, it's just good behavior. I did want to mention if you are using Firefox or Chrome, there are, I don't know if I linked them in here quite yet, but there are a couple plugins that integrate into Firefox or Chrome that you can then, with a right click, check a page for accessibility, and it will highlight the errors and the places that need fixing.
Another link you don't have in here is Site Improve.
Because Site Improve is so gnarly.
It is a little bit gnarly, but it is available.
Right.
You guys, so it's provided by Cornell and by CIT, and you can request for access to a website that you own to run a Site Improve report. I mean, we're doing it for some things that we have here to try to see, you know.
I mean, if you really want to depress yourself, go ahead and do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually, along those lines, the hardest thing about accessibility is there's levels, right? So we were just talking about those 6 pillars. That's sort of like the 6 easiest things that we can do to sort of get the most bang for our buck, right? But there are definitely levels and levels and levels of this that you can get into. When you open up Site Improve, it shows you those really, really deep levels, which is part of the depression that comes out of using it. So really, yeah, take it with a grain of salt. You can, I think, can't you tell it, like, you know, how much, how deep you want to get with it? Yeah. You know, start with somewhere easy. You know?
Is that like the AAA?
Yeah. Yeah, there's A, AA, AAA,
And AA, I think, is what Cornell's pushing us towards, isn't it? So,
which is sort of right in the mid.
It is in the mid, yeah.
It's not as bad as it could be. But Site Improve will depress you.
Yeah. But it'll give you a list of all the stuff you have to do. It'll give you your to-do list.
Right. In the old days, like in the days of yore, when I was young,
back before there was a web.
No, back when the web was just started, there used to be this really cool tool called Bobby. And you could run a site through Bobby, and it would just, I loved Bobby, I don't know why. It had a British policeman as its icon. But then you could plop on your site that you were level 1 compliant or level 2 compliant. I think we need to investigate whether there is some icon or indication of compliance that we start putting on our pages, and then we could actually visibly see progress. And I think that would be a nice sort of indicator. It would also indicate to the world that we are paying attention. So, you know, just identifying pages that are accessible, resources that are accessible, would be a good step. Are there questions out there in the world? Curiosities? Anybody raring to join into the process? We've lost 2 people, so obviously they're not so enthused.
Is anyone out there? I mean, I'm sure some of you are using the Think Typography sites. Have you guys addressed accessibility there? Has anybody run their site through Site Improve? Or I'm just curious myself. I don't know how. I guess Sandy isn't on the line, right? Sandy, you're up. I think she might be able to speak to it, or that doesn't look like it. Okay.
And 2 of these people are Katie, so we have 10 users.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, something we didn't address, which really is not, it's not part of the web accessibility that is by law, but it is something that we should be thinking about as a system. We're also reaching out to people who have slow internet or are, you know, can only access things through their phone and not through a computer,
let's throw in Spanish language resources. So,
I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that you could sort of wrap into this, which of course, I mean, we're going to be careful and not do that with our plan, right, to start with. But it is something to think about. The slow internet thing is a huge deal, I think. And the more you're adding to these sites, the more videos, the more images, the more banner images, things like that, it really does slow it down.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's accessibility writ large. And we have, you know, not providing Spanish language resources is a major downfall for us. But we're not going to fight that battle right now. We need to fight where we can win some victories and then push it forward.
Yeah, but it is on our minds. I
Yeah.
mean, that is something
And-
that we continue to think about.
Bandwidth, surprisingly, I was just at a conference where there were a bunch of tech people from across the country, and bandwidth is an issue in locations across the country.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not just New York State, but
Mhm.
there are some places that have just hideous
Mhm.
connections. So again, how do we provide, so if you're posting videos, what's the obligation? You have to provide those in
Right, lower resolution.
lower
or
res,
whatever,
or do you have to say, we'll send out CDs with copies of the videos,
Right.
things like that?
Yeah.
Back in the old days, that's what some of our online courses, we would do that.
Mhm.
If somebody were connecting from the Adirondacks and they had a 48K modem, we would send them the videos because it's just impossible.
Yeah.
But anyways, now we're sort of spreading far and wide.
That's true.
I have another question. So, you mentioned like the size of images. Do you know if the plugins or Site Improve will tell you like, oh, this image is too big, you should make it smaller?
That's interesting. Does it do that? I'm not
It
sure.
doesn't tell you it's too big.
Uh-huh.
No, but we should, I mean, and I'm sure we should check and see if there are explicit standards for that.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
And then tools for
right.
It's
resizing.
also about like mobile friendliness too,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Although what a lot of sites do, including our public site, is it will take whatever you throw in there and resize it to be whatever.
Right.
However, even again, not just accessibility, but from a usability perspective, you know, when you're loading this enormous image into a page and having it resize it down each time, it takes longer. I mean, people might jump off your site earlier because it takes too long. So that's another thing that we definitely is part of that larger accessibility initiative.
Yeah.
Not to
So
bite off too much, but yeah.
I can't speak
There's
right
Nicole.
now, but Sullivan County, we're taking first steps. Cool. So Sullivan.
Great. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah.
Very exciting. We look forward to tracking your progress.
Yeah. Or, I mean, you know, like write in or talk to us. I mean, it would be good for us to hear how it's going, what is hard, you know. If you want to be part of our plan, you know, like Paul said, please let us know.
Statistics for the load time of each page.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, that's a good way
So-
to get it.
Of you guys that are online right now, do you all know how to easily downsize or resize images? Is that a universal skill we have in the system?
I wouldn't say it's universal.
I
Do you?
Oh my God. This is-
But you have Creative Cloud.
I know.
I use Paint.
I don't know why,
I use
it's like a habit.
Notepad for all my
Yes.
documents.
Courtney knows how. Yay.
All right.
I would guess this group, you know,
Probably, yeah.
in general knows that more than other folks in
Yeah.
their system.
And that's just, I mean, and that's a practice that we also fall into when you look at PowerPoints.
Mhm.
Even though
Oh, yeah.
PowerPoint does theoretically resize, it doesn't. So you end up with these mega large PowerPoint files because people are dropping huge
Mhm.
resolution pictures in.
Right. And PDFs too. You end
Yeah.
up with huge PDFs.
Yeah.
Generate them from Word documents and PowerPoints that are doing that, you know.
PDF accessibility is.
Oh, PDFs,
ugly.
it's a bear. It really is.
Did
We
you
won't
have
get into that here.
Did you have another question, Katie, or you?
No.
Okay, cool.
I have a couple of things before we leave though. Whenever.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm done.